Okay, fine. I'll make a Chargenvy video. Team building in Limbus Company mainly revolves around the 7 main keywords. 5 of these keywords are negative effects that get inflicted on the enemy, which makes them better against bosses, as it gets much easier to stack them. These are the teams that you'll often see discussed, with people arguing about damage, status infliction and whatnot. But what if you want to live a simpler life? What if you just want to hit things until they die? Well, then you're left with 2 main options. And to be honest, one of those options is having a full-on identity crisis, so it's better not to touch that one for now. However, Charge, the unrivaled hero of the early seasons, and one of the most fun, if not insanely optimal team compositions, remains a premier pick for those who value consistency, large numbers, and just breaking people's skulls. That's right, in today's video we will be going over the Charge or Chargenvy composition, going in depth on the identities that make up the team, ego skills that add synergy and push the archetype forward, the many variations you can go for, and how to play the team with maximum efficiency. But before we start, allow me to remind you that most of my viewers are not subscribed. So if you find yourself coming back to my videos or end up enjoying this one, consider subscribing. It takes just a second and helps me out a lot. Without further ado, let's get to Charge. Usually, I begin my team guides by looking at their associated status effect. And when we do that to Charge, we see that the effect does nothing on its own. The count stacks to 20 and decays by 1 at turn end. Other than that, the status has no effect. All the value that Charge can provide is dependent on the identity that uses it, allowing for some unique buffs associated with consuming Charge on different Charge identities. So, instead of looking at Charge, we can address the elephant in the room. I referred to this team as Chargenvy at the beginning of the video. Why? Well, Charge on its own is not as powerful of a team as its other keyword peers. In fact, it's kind of hard to call Charge a team at all. The identities don't have a shared goal, like an effect stack, that they work towards. And there isn't much direct synergy, with only a few identities taking up the support role. Overall, the team kind of lacks unity, with IDs all performing their own play patterns independently. The only way unity can be found in the Charge team is through Envy resonance. Envy is the signature sin of the Charge team, and many ego skills, as well as certain passives, specifically require Envy resonance to function. Incorporating resonance-based effects isn't something unique to this team, and can be seen in multiple other compositions. What is unique to Charge though is the fact that there exists a different faction, not connected to Charge, which also revolves around Envy resonance. That faction is the middle, and it can be combined with Charge to push the team towards greater heights. We'll go deeper into the Chargenvy team a bit later in the video, but for now all you need to know is that Chargenvy is a branch of the Charge team that focuses more on Envy resonance, to the point where one or multiple slots can be taken up by non-Charge units. Okay, introductions out of the way, let's look at the identities, shall we? And we'll start with the most prominent units on the team. First off, we have the one, the only, in the name of love and hate, Don Quixote. She is the first Walpurgisnacht identity of the Charge team, and, depending on the type of encounter, she's either the strongest or the second strongest charge unit in the game. Dawn's gimmick lies in her two forms, which she periodically switches between by stacking effects and using certain skills. Her positive form is slightly better against a single target, but her negative form has AoE, meaning it clears out waves like no other. Additionally, Dawn is equipped with Envy on her skill 2, skill 3, Clashable Guard, and 3 powerful Ego skills, meaning she's always the centerpiece of any Envy resonance chain you want to make. Dawn is a great charge damage dealer, especially when she gets to use her AoE. However, part of her power is locked behind the In the Name of Love and Hate Ego skill, which is something we'll go over a bit later. Next up, we have Sword Sharpened with Tears Rodion, the second Walpurgisnacht identity on the team and one you're very familiar with if you use Syncing. On the charge team, Rodia may not get the great value of her Syncing infliction, but she remains a powerful physical damage dealer. She has a 2-stance gimmick similar to Dawn, but unlike Dawn, who is forced to fluctuate between her 2 stances constantly, Rodia can stay in one for the entire fight. Of course, the negative stance wins with no contest here, as it drops the mostly useless defensive buffs in favor of crushing offense. Rodia is not as good as Dawn at chaining Envy though, as only her skill 2 has that Sin affinity. But luckily, you're not forced to use her skills in a particular order, unlike many other charge identities, so you can choose to hold onto it until you set up a good chain. For our next identity, we have to jump back from Season 6 all the way to Season 4, as we're looking at multi-crack office rep Faust. Faust is a strong, pure charge identity, gaining charge with her skill 3 and consuming it with her skill 2 for loads of damage. She scales well over time, contributes to Envy resonance nicely, and has access to an impactful Ego skill. She's a pretty simple unit, but when played right, she remains quite a menace even by today's standards. Next up, we're jumping back up to Season 5, and with it, Arcorp Reindeer Honglu. Honglu's play pattern is extremely similar to that of Faust. He too gains charge with his skill 3, and consumes it with his Envy affinity skill 2, scaling with charge potency in the process and contributing to Envy resonance. He doesn't pack quite as much of a punch as Faust, and doesn't have a powerful Envy ego like her, but he still does have an Envy ego, and the differences between the power of the two units are barely perceptible. These 4 identities are a constant in the world of charge teams, as they output great damage and are not the ones getting subbed out depending on which type of charge team you're running. Outside of the core 4, charge has multiple sinners that have more than one potential option to choose from for the team. Those sinners are Roshu, Heathcliff, and Mersault. There's also Sinclair, but we'll get to him a bit later. Roshu's 2 charge IDs are Warp Corp and Red Eyes, and I'm sure you've seen a comparison between the two, or have at least thought about it. Both of them are what I would call old-school charge identities, as both Ryoshus gain charge count with their first and second skills, while consuming it with their third and strongest. This makes their gameplay loops quite similar, and in fact, the two identities are very comparable to each other. That being said, there are differences. The most obvious one is damage types. Warp is mono slash, Red Eyes is mono blunt. This kind of dictates when one ID is clearly better than the other, as they're affected by different resistances. However, on even footing resistance-wise, there still are some key differences. Warp Core Ryoshu is a whole lot faster, being able to nuke with her skill 3 as soon as she hits 7 charge count. Red Eyes Ryoshu, on the other hand, does not have a skill 3 until she gets to 15 of both of her unique charge variants. Well, technically she does have a skill 3, but that skill is pretty abhorrent, meaning you really don't want to use it if you can't turn it into a skill 3 too. Outside of that skill 3 though, Warp Ryoshu is also just stronger overall, dealing a bunch of damage with her skill 2 and reaching just slightly above on her skill 1 despite rolling considerably lower. This is in comparison to Red Eyes Ryoshu's maximum values, by the way. But the last requirement for her passive, coupled with the turn-long refractory period that comes after her skill 3 too, makes it hard for Lobotomy to actually reach those values at all, making the damage difference very apparent under realistic circumstances. After all of that, you'd think that Warp is clearly the better option, but Red Eyes does have one ace up her sleeve. The damage difference between the two identities isn't completely insurmountable, and Lobotomy's sins make her potentially a better pick for Envy-focused teams due to her Envy skill 1 as opposed to Warp's Envy skill 3. This means that both IDs could find play depending on your team composition, though most of the time the Ryoshu slot is dropped in favor of a better identity in Chargenvy compositions. Heathcliff's two options are Multicrack and Warp Corp, again. And while Warp is the newest Charge ID and is a 3-star identity that is being compared to a 2-star, I actually believe it's not as cut and dry as you might think. Unlike the two Ryoshus, who are very similar, the two Heathcliffs are fundamentally different. Multicrack Heathcliff follows the Multicrack Faust playbook and gains charge with his skill 3 to then consume it with his skill 2. Warp, on the other hand, is a bit weirder and can consume with his skill 3 in large amounts, as well as consuming a bit with his skill 2. As for gaining charge, his defense really helps him with that. I have a fresh video about this identity, so go watch that for more nuance, because I won't be going too in-depth here. Comparing the damage of the two units, Warp easily takes the cake here. He's got a stronger skill 3 and can choose to defend and get another copy of that skill instead of using his much weaker skills 1 and 2. However, Multicrack isn't on the team for his damage, as his debuff infliction is the real thing that makes Heathcliff shine. Defense level down applied by his skill 2 and blunt fragility on his skill 3 increase the damage of his other allies, all of whom can dish out tons of physical damage. And his unique photoelectricity effect can spread out charge to his allies, thus helping them set up and scale quicker. Also, while it's true that all of Multicrack's effects are applied on the same turn, the haste provided by his passive allows him to consistently outspeed his team and get maximum value from all his debuffs. As for which one to choose, I can see arguments for both sides. Multicrack is the cheaper option and is incredibly valuable if you don't have all the charge spreading ego skills to help you out with scaling. The value of his damage increasing effects can also narrow the gap between him and Warp in effective damage inflicted, allowing Multicrack to remain as a viable and fairly impactful option. Warp, on the other hand, dominates against multiple enemies, as all of Multicrack's value lies in debuffs, which cannot be taken advantage of effectively in group encounters. He's also very consistent, as his ability to give himself copies of his strongest skill make him a whole lot less skill order reliant. And he's great at taking out enemies that get staggered easily, due to his skill 3 double dipping into enemy resistances with its bonus damage effect. As for our last contested slot, we have Merceau, and at this point you might be asking yourself, Merceau? Doesn't he, not have any particularly strong IDs for this team? And you'd be right. All of his options are identities that aren't particularly flashy or memorable. However, you do really want to slot Merceau in, specifically due to his access to Electric Screaming, one of the most important tools of the team. And usually, in these team guides, I first look at identities, then ego, and so on. However, it's kinda impossible to talk about Merceau without bringing up Electric Screaming, which is why we'll have to look at the ego right now. Electric Screaming Merceau costs 4 Envy and 1 Wrath, which makes it very spammable in the charge team. Before attack, it gives Merceau 12 charge count, and after attack, the skill buffs up an amount of allies based on Envy Resonance, by giving them 8 charge count each, as well as up to 2 Envy damage up. This skill is powerful glue for the team, as its spammable nature allows you to inject a ton of charge count into your identities by using Electric Screaming on your Envy Resonance turns. Access to such an impactful tool is what makes you want to run Merceau, and when you do pick him, you have a couple options. Namely, when looking at pure charge, the 2 units that fit the bill are Warp Corp and R Corp. Now, what matters most when using Electric Screaming is speed, as Merceau going before his other allies allows him to supply them with charge for the current turn, increasing your team's tempo. It also makes the Envy damage up effect do something, as it's only active for the turn that the ego is used on. And in terms of speed, you'd expect R-Corp to win due to his higher maximum average speed stat with his passive up. But actually, precisely due to the fact that he needs 5 Envy in the bank, while spamming an Envy heavy ego skill, as well as 15 charge count to actually beat out Warp Corp's natural roll of 4 to 8, I'd say Warp Corp Merceau is a better holder for the ego skill. That being said, you'll probably run neither of them. Why? Well, we're done with the contested slots of charge, so it's about time we move on to the identities of Chargenvy, or more specifically, Middle Merceau and Middle Sinclair. That's right, we're using our good friend Sinclair and a Season 3 2-star identity. Why? Well, it's simple really. Sinclair is a powerful Envy-focused damage dealer, who scales over time by gaining stacks of Book of Vengeance, similar to what charge identities do with charge potency. His unique strength lies in his skills being empowered if they're part of long resonance chains, and his counter actually turning into his skills 2 and 3 with enough resonance. This means that even though Sinclair doesn't reach absurd numbers on any one of his skills, partially due to being denied his bleed conditionals, he has the ability to spam these skills over and over, which eventually adds up to a whole lot of damage. Middle Merceau is on the team as a support. His job still revolves around spamming Electric Screaming, for the most part. However, Merceau being a middle ID actually can allow Sinclair to scale twice as fast if played correctly, and on the turns where he's not pressing his ego skill, he gets to use skills that either soften up the enemy on the next turn or buff up the envy skills of his allies. Additionally, Merceau generates SP for Sinclair, which is extra valuable when Sinclair is going for counters. Overall, middle Sinclair slots in as a more powerful damage dealer than other options, and middle Merceau tags along to do the job that other Merceau identities can do, while also providing extra support, mostly for Sinclair. Notably, you can dip further into Envy and drop more charge identities. Both of Heathcliff's charge IDs are kinda mid, so you can go for Wild Hunt or Full Stop instead. In the same vein, there are other non-charge Envy identities that you can consider, but honestly that's a bit too detached from the task for this video, which is making a charge team. So, even though leaning further into Envy can lead to the creation of a stronger team, I'll hold off from adding more than just the middle identities, and maybe a better Heathcliff. Okay, after this very long identity section, we can move on to the egos, and there aren't nearly as many of those in the charge team. We've already gone over Electric Screaming Merceau and all of its value, so I won't be repeating myself. However, there's a second Electric Screaming Ego, which belongs to Dawn. The Awakening version of the skill is not particularly interesting, as all it does is consume 20 charge count when Dawn has that amount. The Corrosion, though, converts some of Dawn's health into charge count in order to reach that 20 mark before consuming, allowing you to trade some HP for 2 charge potency, helping scale Dawn's damage much quicker. Another skill that belongs to Dawn is In the Name of Love and Hate. This skill is a WoW level nuke with a ton of attack weight scaling with charge, meaning you can use it to swiftly clear out waves of enemies. It also buffs up and heals allies based on Envy Resonance, while charging up Dawn and allowing her to enter her negative form faster. The skill additionally provides an extremely good passive to Dawn, which not only increases her damage further, but also gives her a second copy of her skill 3, greatly improving the magical girl's offensive capabilities. Both of these skills require Pride to use, meaning that if you want to use them early or often, you'll need to modify your team in a way that specifically adds a bit more Pride into the mix. Funnily enough, this isn't all Dawn provides for her team, as Telepole is yet another charge ego available to the same Sinner. This one only requires Wrath, Gloom and Envy, and it spreads out charge to all allies based on Envy Resonance, while also activating a passive that continues to give out charge based on Envy Resonance every turn. Another telepole you might want to use belongs to Faust. This skill can give its user up to 10 charge count at once, and also provides a pretty powerful passive, which increases Faust's damage and lowers the amount of charge she spends with her skills. This does slow down her potency gain though, so it's best to use telepole after Faust has scaled up a bit to get the most value. These are all the skills you will be using in the charge team. There are a couple more, but they're either not very powerful, have awkward costs, or belong to sinners you don't want to use. With this, all the pieces are in place, and we can assemble our team. This process is very easy, as you just grab the 4 good damage dealers, a Heathcliff of your choice, and the 2 middle identities, and just like that, you're done. But of course, there are status purists among us, so if you're looking to build a team of exclusively charge identities, I'd replace the middles with Warp Corporatio and Merceau. However, the one place where you would want a pure charge team over Chargenvy is the Mirror Dungeon, where your Heathcliff slot always goes to Warp, and instead of Merceau, you pick up an identity that rolls higher. For example, Warp Otis. This, of course, is a team for floor 15 runs, as Charge is generally very bad at clearing 5 floors for quick rewards, but can reach some very high numbers, making it a great choice for clearing 50 adversity. And now that we have our team figured out, all that's left is to look at how it's played. And honestly, it's pretty simple. Rodia's play pattern is extremely straightforward. All she needs to do is press her defense on turn 1 to enter her negative stance. From then on, you just use her second skill in Resonance Chains, use a counter over 1 skill 1 for another stack of Tear Sharpened, and make sure to never replace her second skill with anything, as it's extremely valuable. Dawn's preferred stance changes depending on who you're up against. Her positive skills do more damage than her negative ones against one target, but her negative skills get AoE. If you're up against a boss and your Dawn enters her negative stance, you want to look for her skill 3 ASAP, as using that skill sends Dawn back into her positive state. Against a group though, you can instead rush getting 3 stacks of Magical Arcana. This sends Dawn into her negative stance and allows you to stack up Hysteria to give her skill 2 AoE and her skill 3 more AoE. That being said, against groups you can still stay in Dawn's positive form and rely on her signature Ego skill for AoE, as long as your variation of the team can easily fuel it. Faust really likes beginning the fight with her skill 3 available, as that skill instantly charges her up and allows her to go for a skill 2 on the second turn, dealing some damage and gaining a point of charge potency. After that though, she relies quite a lot on outside charge support to be able to send out another empowered skill 2 quickly. Also, her defense is always available if you really need an extra point of envy and you're fine with getting rid of a skill 1. And speaking of skill 1, it does also consume charge, so be mindful of that. Arcorp Honglu, once again, is very similar to Faust, as he also wants to start the fight with a skill 3 into a skill 2. That being said, while Faust can use her second skill afterwards as long as she hits at least 5 charge count, Honglu really shouldn't be doing that, as Mind Whip becomes uncontrollable and starts hitting allies this way. Also, his skill 1 doesn't consume charge, so it's easier to build up a surplus. But using his defense for resonance does not go anywhere. Middle Sinclair is the guy you constantly create envy chains for. As long as you've got at least 4 envy skills going, Sinclair never needs to use his skill 1, and can stick to just using his skills 2 and 3 over and over, either normally or through his counter. Sinclair gains stacks of Book of Vengeance by hitting an enemy that has previously hit an ally, with the amount of stacks being greatly increased for middle allies, including Sinclair himself. This means that Sinclair can set up quickly if you go for counters on him and Merceau, allowing the two of them to take damage to create stacks of Vendetta Mark. Notably, with unbreakable coins being practically omnipresent, you can also choose to use Sinclair's normal skills against unbreakable coins, which will let you generate Vendetta Mark while winning clashes and gaining SP. As for Middle Merceau, we've already talked about him. He's gonna be pressing Electric Screaming on most turns. And when he's not doing that, he's either supporting his team or going for counters to increase Sinclair's ramp-up speed and contribute to resonance. Much like Sinclair, Merceau is also encouraged to get hit by unbreakable coins, as this can let you get the extra value on Sinclair's passive while continuing to spam Electric Screaming. The rest of your substitute options are very easy to understand. Like, I'm sure you don't need me to tell you how Warp Ryoshu works. And yeah, this is about everything I have to say about the Charge team. Surprisingly, this whole ordeal took quite a while longer than I would have expected out of a seemingly simple team like Charge. So, where should you use Charge, and should you even build it? Well, Charge or Chargenvy, being a physical damage focused team that primarily deals Envy damage, is obviously very good against Envy weak targets, but it also shines against blunt weak enemies, as almost all the damage in this team comes in the form of blunt damage. However, looking at Charge, even when it's built correctly, played correctly, and understood completely, and then comparing it to the inflicted status teams, paints quite a grim picture. Yes, the team is not technically bad. It will still clear fights far faster than any cope generalist team, but it gets absolutely smoked by the current frontrunners, only really catching up against enemy groups, which just so happen to be the easier of the two encounter types in Limbus Company. That being said, I am here to deliver info, not make your decisions for you. If you want to run Charge, go for it. It's a whole lot of fun to play, and other teams really don't get the privilege of incorporating the middle into their ranks. Also, speaking of the middle, there's a non-zero chance of us getting a Ricardo identity next season. So, who knows? Maybe he'll make Chargenvy meta. Well, probably not, but a man can hope. So yeah, if you disagree or have something to add, feel free to leave a comment below, and I'm curious to see what you guys think of the Chargenvy composition. I better not see jokes about how this video about a barely relevant team is longer than the guides to the actual meta stuff though. If you enjoyed the video at any point, leave a like to let me know. And if you want to see more like this, consider subscribing. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Goodbye!